was just an ordinary day. And someone came back to my office and said, "Laura, do you know what's going on in New York?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Turn on the TV." And at that instant, it was almost like at the same exact time, the emergency manager for Erie County called me and said, "Laura, I need you to get shelters open." He said, "They're grounding all the planes across the country, and there's one left in the sky. And when the planes land, we've got to get the people out of the airport." And I said, "It's done. It's done." So we mobilized, we opened up shelters, and my phone rang again. He said, "It's down. It's down in Shanksville." He said, "Stand down." So we did. And then the next call I got was our headquarters was in Washington, D.C., and they wanted our emergency vehicle in Shanksville. So I mobilized a team and sent them to Shanksville. The next day I sent 2 responders to New York, and then we had rolling response on either side to Flight 93 and to New York. When I went to New York, I worked in the capacity of it's called Family Services. It was a family service supervisor, and our job was to take care of the people that were impacted by the collapse. And anybody who was displaced, anybody who lost someone in the towers, it was our job to evaluate their needs and begin their first steps of recovery. But I will tell you that that was the first time that I thought, there's no recovery in this.
I was there with Red Cross. I did caseworker. We interviewed to see what we could do to help. Food, clothing, housing. I felt honored to be there, and I felt in my life that was the most important thing I had ever done. No matter about the fires in Erie or other hurricanes we'd been on, that to me, our country was being bombed, and I just felt honored to be there and help.
You know, I couldn't help but think back to Pearl Harbor. It was Burt Wheeler was an American isolationist senator, and he voted against involvement in war for 10 years. After Pearl Harbor occurred, and they asked him what happened when FDR came to ask for a declaration of war, they said, "What are you going to do, Mr. Wheeler? What are you going to do? You've always voted against war." He says, "What do you mean, what am I going to do? What kind of dumb question is that? There's only one thing left to do, and that is lick hell out of them." That demonstrated his recognition that we are one people. We've been struck, and it cannot be laid aside. It drew us together, it bonded us, ended differences between Republicans and Democrats, Protestant and Catholic, black and white. It was one of those moments that defined us as a country, as a people, as a nation. We live by our memories. It's our memories who define who we are. When we lose our memories, we have no sense of who we are. And that moment defined us as Americans. It defined us in a way that we are all in this together. And for that reason, we have to remember that, like we have to remember Pearl Harbor, like we want to remember the day that Fort Sumter was struck for the first time in the Civil War. These are moments that define a nation's history. When, it's been put very well that a nation without memory is a nation without a past or a future, because it is the past that defines the present, and it's the present that determines the future. Well, 9/11 was a kind of Pearl Harbor moment for this generation. Pearl Harbor was one of those days where you remember where you were. I was a boy of 6 when that happened, and remember vividly where I was and what I did. Other people have memory of what happened when we went on the moon for the first time. 9/11 was one of those searing national moments where you know that something significant happened. And that significance was something that drew us all together. The feeling that we really were one people, and that when one was struck, all were in danger. So 9/11 was something that Americans who are not born yet will look back on and marvel at the way the country came together, the way we marveled at how we came together with Pearl Harbor. So history is what defines us as a country, and when we forget history, we forget who we are.
I was just actually getting the computer on and just sitting down to enjoy a cup of coffee and see what I needed to do for the day. And immediately I felt the shock that took place from the explosion. Being a geologist, I thought immediately this cannot be an earthquake, because I study a lot of those earthquakes. Felt the explosion, the vibration of the building. Actually, the building itself vibrated quite a few degrees. Immediately I went through one of the windows and I saw papers flying all over the place. The metal on the other tower, the north tower, was kind of protruding outwards. So I thought that was a bomb. So I knew there was something really bad that happened. The local elevator was from my floor, which if I recall well, it was the 96th floor. It was a local elevator that will hold probably about 10 people. You'll go down to the 76th floor. On the 76th floor, now you have a series of very large elevators with a large corridor where everybody from the upper floors will come over, take the express elevators that will hold maybe 30, 40 people, and you'll go all the way down to the first floor. Within seconds, that elevator was full. And most of the younger men, we never make any intents to get into the elevator. It was kind of one thing that you just feel that moment. So we're allowing all the women, all the people just to get in. So I look around and I said, wow, if I stay here for forever, I might never get in the elevator. So I recall going through an exit door and just running. And I don't recall seeing people at all through the steps for many, many floors. At one point, I don't remember if I crossed to another exit, but it was all the way just running for your life. I did see firefighters, police officers. When I got to the lobby, all the police officers and maybe some firefighters, they were holding hands and basically not allowing anybody to go into the lower floors of the subway, of the buildings, so they were directing all people to go to the street. I remember seeing hundreds of people looking up. I still remember the people that were staring at the previous building up. They were just turning around and running. And I just looked up, and I saw the ball of fire that everybody sees on TV when the second plane crashed the second tower. So I was right there on the sidewalk when that big ball of fire came up. And seconds after that, it was just debris falling apart, falling next to me, and got disoriented. I didn't know exactly what happened, but I didn't know that it was a huge fire coming up from the top floor, and there were still people there. And I also knew that any of these fragments are going to fall next to me, and this is it. There was this lady, it was the wife of one of the engineers that were staring at the window when that all happened. And she said that she was on the phone with her husband. I don't remember who called who, but they were on the phone. His wife was in New Jersey, the engineer was in the South Tower, and her husband was telling his wife, "Don't worry about it, honey, everything is okay." And she's watching TV. There was an incident in the North Tower, I'm fine. Right on the moment she's watching TV, and I think she's watching the building, the airplane hitting the South Tower. So that was the last time she heard from her husband. And I felt extremely bad because I was probably the last person who saw 20 or 25 people that died from my company on that floor. But I'm always optimistic about life. I came to Erie. I was lucky enough to work in housing programs, work for the Redevelopment Authority for many years. So I put my mind and everything I could do to do a good job and help people have a better house, fix some of the issues. So I was able to heal through helping other people.
After September 11th, my life kind of spiraled out of control, and I was in a really deep depression, and I didn't know at the time I was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. I wasn't diagnosed until I moved here. So I left New York to basically escape. I walked away from my career. I started drinking very heavily, started using drugs, and I was actually homeless for about a week and a half. My roommate threw me out, and after spending one night in a shelter, I called my dad and I said, what are you doing tomorrow night? Just, trying to strike up a conversation because I didn't want him concerned. He says, oh, really, nothing. I said, okay, I'm coming in on Amtrak. I'll be there about 1:30, 2 in the morning. He said, is everything okay? I said, no, but I'll tell you about it when I get there.
If you ask children in schools and you said, what exactly is an American? Is being an American? And probably many don't really know. So it's really important for us, for this monument to remember that Americans are working people, are people that are striving for an ideal, for freedom. That's what an American is. Being an American and going through all of this, the fragility of life, knowing that today we're alive and tomorrow we're dead, we could be dead. And I do feel that at every step we take as an American, as a new immigrant, we need to bring solidarity to our people in our own country and also to other people, overseas. And people overseas, the people who hate us, we need to show them there's a good side of Americans. It's not always what they think we are.
When I got down there, I just couldn't believe the devastation. And one of the things that I think struck me was it was almost like there was no sound. There was just, things were going on, but it was almost like everybody was moving around in a state of shock. And the grief on everybody's faces was like something I had never experienced. And everywhere you went, people were sobbing and crying, and it was almost too much for anybody to bear. One of the things that I always remember was the tridents, which were the bottom of the towers, and they were just so twisted and turned, and then there were mounds and mounds of debris, but there wasn't anything that looked identifiable. There wasn't anything that looked like, oh, that's a computer table, or, that's a desk, or there wasn't anything. It just was mounds and mounds of debris. And I remember the rumbling of the trucks as they would leave out of Ground Zero. And they were taking the debris over to the barges. And as they dumped, there were men on the ground with rakes, and they were sifting through in case they missed something. It was just almost too much to take in because it was just so devastating. I got home that night at midnight, and I walked in the door and my son said, "Mom, did you hear what happened?" And I said, "I know." I said, "I've been working on it all day." And I think that was the first time that I actually realized what was occurring in this country. We trained hard, at the Red Cross. We were used to disasters and hurricanes and wildfires. But I don't think any amount of training in any of the response capacities could have prepared us for what we dealt with in New York. that there was an area that was identified. It was below Canal Street, and the evacuation zone, the hot zone, was everything below Canal, and the people were evacuated, and they weren't allowed to return home. The barriers were put up. It was identified as a crime scene, and so everything that they knew and owned was below Canal Street, but they were not allowed to go back in. So it was our job to evaluate and try to get them to some sense of normalcy. I think the most important thing to remember about 9/11 was the humanity in it, and how people came together from all over the country to do what they could to help their fellow man recover. And no matter what little role all of us played, we all played a part. And you know, and I think that's the legacy of 9/11. My response at the World Trade Center has led to a diagnosis of cancer. And because of the people that worked at the World Trade Center site, or people who lived there that were impacted by the plume dust, there are right now over 70,000 responders that are sick. To date, 1,600 have died. 2,500 right now have cancer. And it's an ongoing medical crisis, which is a secondary piece to 9/11. I'm not angry about being sick, because I was very honored to be a part of the response at the World Trade Center site. If someone said if you could go back and change all this and never go there, I'd do it again.
My chief had said to me, "You're going in the next wave," because they had commandeered some city buses, transit buses. I said, okay. So I got all my gear together and packed some extra stuff in case I got dirty or something ripped or anything like that. And about an hour went by, and he came to me again and he said, "Aren't you a grief counselor?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "Okay, you're going to stay behind because we're opening up phone banks to talk to family members." I said, "You're killing me. I need to be downtown." They said, "We need you here." In my experience on the job, in a building collapse, you've got a small window to rescue someone. And so as the night progressed and the hours are going by, you know that it's going to be bad. And it was. We had handwritten pages of names that were confirmed missing. As I was going through the list of names, there was many that I knew. And that became even more difficult. Unfortunately, I was assigned to the morgue unit. I had to remove the bodies of many of my firefighter brothers. There were several that I trained. There were several that I had personal interactions with. Incredible men, great firefighters, families, fathers, and they were gone. As you were approaching Manhattan, there's a beautiful view from one of the highways of the East Side skyline. And always as you look to the left, there were the towers. And they were gone, replaced by smoke. I got down to ground zero on September 13th, sometime in the afternoon. And it was the most horrific thing I've ever seen in my life. And it was nauseating to know that so many people had died. As a rescuer, as emergency personnel, you're trained to help. and you just felt helpless because you knew nothing could be done. So when I got there, the first thing that's really struck me was the military presence. Even as a city employee in a city ambulance, I had to go through 2 military checkpoints to get to Ground Zero. Out of the vehicle, searched, IDs checked, bomb-sniffing dogs and everything. So right away, I was like, this is war. Must be what war is like, and must be what people in the Middle East have to go through on a daily basis. And I just thought that was sickening to have to live that way. And just the scope and the magnitude of destruction was just mind-boggling. What folks saw on TV, you see in a box, but to live it and be there, not just, and again, it's not just to visualize, but the smells and the sounds, and then you combine that all together, it's just sensory overload. For me personally, I lost 343 brothers, 341 firefighters and 2 paramedics. In New York City alone, almost 3,000 people died. Combine that with the Pentagon and here in Pennsylvania, it's just something that needs to never be forgotten, that we're not invincible and we are vulnerable. But folks need to remember, because as the time has passed and every anniversary has passed, folks have just become, it's just another day. We're becoming complacent again. Complacency will kill you. The generations before us had Pearl Harbor, and there's a living memorial in Hawaii of the Arizona that folks go to, hundreds of people every day. This is a living piece of history here in Erie. It's very, very rare where you could touch a piece of history, where you could see it and experience it. When the Beam first came to Erie and we toured the fairs, and I got to speak to kids about it, I was shocked how many said, this is not even taught in school. This is part of American history. It should be taught, it needs to be taught. And so that future generations will remember the sacrifices that were made. And not just the people that died that day, the people that have become very sick because of working at Ground Zero.